I want to kind of start off with James here. I wanted to get into the first some of the stats here. One of them was the rate of divorce, and we talked about this yesterday. And so if you can just fill us in on some of this stuff, because the reason why I'm asking this first is I was again talking or sort of locking horns with Matt Walsh here, and he didn't want to I guess maybe it was Pearl who said something like this. I can't remember, but he was basically responding to somebody who said that the failure rate of marriage was 75%, and I don't think that that's accurate. So
yeah, so I think numbers are important, and I think I enjoyed yesterday's conversation on Rule Zero a lot, and I especially enjoyed talking to Andrew to the point where I actually tweeted after the show yesterday saying how much I enjoy a debate with someone who knows what the hell they're talking about. And it's obvious that he does know what he's talking about and that he's done some research. So I figured in anticipation of today, though, like all good lawyers, that I would do a little research and I would get the most current numbers I could possibly give. So I think it might be nice to start off with some statistics, and then we can kind of put them wherever we want to put them. But all of these are easy to find online. CDC, whatever your opinions are of the CDC in terms of the compilation of statistics from the Bureau of Vital Statistics. This is from August of 2023. And I want to just throw some concepts and some numbers out at you, because look, we're always being told, it's a Ben Shapiro favorite thing to say, facts don't care about your feelings. Well, the feelings don't care, feelings don't care about facts either, So the truth is, I understand there's a lot of feelings involved in marriage things. Everybody's caught up on the idea of I think people like these straw men, when you were talking, Rollo, about how this pops up around every election cycle. Of course, these kinds of straw man arguments come up around every election cycle. Why do politicians on the state level love talking about how they're hard on drunk drivers? Because is there a big pro DWI group out there somewhere, like Mothers for Drunk Driving? Everyone's, why do we have such oppressive and unbelievably vicious anti-domestic violence legislation out there on the books that's catching tons and tons of men in the net? Again, I can tell you, intimate partner abuse, domestic violence, those are real things. But that's not why we have so many laws in the books that are anti-domestic violence. It's because there's no pro-domestic violence lobby out there. So it's very safe for any politician, whichever side of the aisle they're on, getting up and saying, I am against domestic violence. Well, lottie fucking dies. There are a lot of people out there going, I'm pro-domestic violence. It's a ridiculous argument. So it's the same thing now. What is this year's flavor? This year's flavor is I am for happy marriages. Well, who the fuck is against happy marriages? Is there a group of people out there saying I'm against happy marriages? Because if you want to try to put that on the red pill, like that shoe just isn't going to fit. It's not like anyone in this community is saying, oh yeah, we think marriages suck and marriage as a technology is awful. And even if you're happily married, you should get unhappy and get divorced. That's a ridiculous argument. It's a straw man. So I think we should really be looking at facts. So let me throw a couple of statistics out here, a couple of facts, and then we can all figure out what to do with those. Because, I love people who say they love America but hate Americans. And I love people who say that, they care about, marriage satisfaction or the divorce rate, but all they want to do is just create barriers to getting out of unhappy marriages. They don't want to talk about the underlying causes for divorce. So let's talk about statistically what those causes are. And then anybody, particularly TradCom people that are saying, hey, we're really trying to support marriages, we want to end divorce. Cool. Instead of creating bigger barriers to divorce and making my job more lucrative as a divorce lawyer, maybe you can do some of these things that'll shore up helping people's marriages. So let's look at some statistics. So in terms of divorce rates, divorce rates, when people say 73% or in the 70s, yes, third marriages, if you're married 3 times, third time is not a charm, 73% divorce rate for third marriages, 67% divorce rate for second marriages, 52% divorce rate for first marriages. Now, this is the statistics as of 2021 because it takes the year for them to compile the statistics. So in 2023, you get the numbers that reflected the year of 2021, not 2022. So when you average it out, that's where you get this number of 56% marriages end in divorce, is that they're averaging out, but they're not giving the same weight to all 3 of those things. But it's 52% for first marriages, 67% for second marriages, 73% for third marriages. 40% of new marriages include a partner who is remarrying. So the majority of marriages, 60%, are first marriages for both partners, but as many as 20% of unions are one person who's been married before. So again, remember, some of these statistics are a little tricky when you look at the divorce rate because you're talking about people who've been married multiple times, okay? Only 6% of divorced couples remarry each other. So I guess once you've seen the movie, you don't want to see it again. But interestingly enough, 72% of reuniting couples who remarry each other after divorcing each other stay married, which is really weird. Okay, this is a really interesting statistic, and I'm going to be really interested to hear everybody's perspective on this. Having friends who are divorced dramatically increases your risk of divorce. Okay.
Yeah.
So couples who have friends who divorce have a 75% increase in their own marriage risk. Okay. And even couples with 2 degrees of separation. Well, that's because of this, there's a lot of sociologists that say that divorce is a social contagion of sorts. So I thought that was very, very interesting. And just a couple other stats I want to throw out there. Couples who live together before marriage are more likely to divorce. Okay, so that's something that Christian conservatives and other religious individuals who say, many trad cons who are of a religious perspective, even if someone's not religious, they might say, hey, look, you know, the biblical covenants that say people shouldn't be married or living together before they're married or having premarital sex, there's actually some statistical evidence to support the fact that parties who are a total of 57% of couples who did not cohabitate prior to marriage had a union that lasted 20 or more years compared to 46% who lived together before tying the knot. So that's a 10% difference. That's significant. This is something I saw yesterday after the conversation with Andrew that I thought was really, really interesting because it's something where Andrew and I were in agreement. And that is over 70% of couples report not understanding the realities or stages of marriage. Okay, so this is people who are divorcing. 72% of them reported, and it's self-reporting obviously, okay, that one or both of them didn't fully understand the commitment involved in marriage before they got married. And that goes to Andrew's point yesterday that I very much agreed with about how there maybe should be better barriers to entry into the covenant of marriage. Maybe this is something that you shouldn't be able to do for $20 with Elvis marrying you. In Nevada, by the way, highest divorce rate in the United States. Now, here's something that I don't think you're going to hear out of all of these politicians while they continue to have their hands in your pockets. Divorce rates are much higher among couples below the poverty line. Living below the poverty level, we all know, causes tremendous stress on people. Okay, 46% of adults ages 18 to 55 who live below the poverty level have divorced. Okay, so that's a fairly significant number compared to 12%. Okay, so that's a pretty huge number. And then also income. The divorce rate decreases as income increases to a point, okay? So couples, as their income increases, the divorce rate tends to decrease. Once you have an income of around $200,000 as a combined household income, you stay at about 30%. Once it hits $600,000 of income, it drops to 25%. Okay, but once it exceeds that, it goes back up to 30%. So the idea is you should be rich, but not really rich. Okay, like you should have a good amount of money, but not, and definitely don't be poor, because being poor would be bad. Again, so these are some questions about what are these things we can solve for if we're really that concerned about saving marriage. The median age of first marriages is increasing. In 2022, the median age of marriage was 32 for men, 30 for women. Jeez. So let's just tie that in with the biological. Yeah, let's tie. I know that Rollo's going to have a blast tying that in with the biological reality of when people have babies. But to put that in perspective, in 2012, okay, 2012. So we're going, because these are 2022 statistics. Let's go back 10 years. The average age for a woman was 26, and for a man it was 28. So look at that jump in 10 years. Look at how much that's changed, okay? And then the average age of people who divorce, 46 for men, 44 for women. Couples who marry, this is a great one, before age 32 have the lowest divorce rates. But it has to be from 20 to 32. If you marry under the age of or at the age of 20, that's a higher divorce rate. Once you pass 32, the divorce rates increase by 5% per year until the age that they marry. So those are just some statistics. I mean, listen, there's a bunch more that I got for you guys in terms of educational levels. Obviously, the divorce rate for people with an education of high school or less is 39% for men, 37% for women. Whereas if you have a college education, 26% for men. So 26 versus 39, and 37 for women versus 30. So the trope that some people have in their minds that, an educated woman is going to be more likely to divorce, that's actually not true. The lower the education level for women and for men, the higher the likelihood of divorce. So that's a very interesting statistic. And then I wanted to end on, because I know we have some religious people on the panel today, and I have a tremendous respect for religion. But the religion with the lowest divorce population is Hindu. So if we're very much pro-marriage, we need to get people out there. We need to evangelize for the Hindus. Because unfortunately, the highest divorce population is evangelical Protestants. So the evangelical Protestants they're way far behind the Hindus. Only 5% of Hindus report divorce, okay? So we've got, as compared to 14% of evangelical Protestants getting divorced. But they are still doing better, by the way, than those who are unaffiliated or not religious. That's 11%. 11% so being religious does increase your chances of remaining married, particularly if you're Hindu.
Now, let me throw in a couple of caveats here, first of all, because I also want to be able to separate this by socioeconomic level, also ethnicity and stuff like that as well. Because like some of my stats are showing that, if you are, I forget which one is it? It's let's see, among race and Hispanic or of Hispanic origins, ever married Asian women and men had the lowest proportion of ever divorced. So there is going to be a cultural, ethnic variation in all of this as well too, not just by religion. And the other thing is what's the maybe I just don't have these stats available, but what is the most numerous religion on planet Earth? Is it Hindu or is it
Christianity?
Christianity is the largest religion on Earth.
3 billion or something like that.
Yeah. So I was just wondering, because like when I hear like something like, well, it's more Hindus stay married rather than like say Christians or whatever, I gotta like also like take that with a grain of salt, because you gotta remember the displacement or the dispersion.
I think he was kind of being funny. Like also they lead the world in domestic abuse by far. Like it's not like he's talking about arranged marriages, Rollo. Like there's no way that we're not going to do that. And the majority of this country is Protestant, right? If you choose a religion,
I think what I've said before is we're interested. I don't think we should just be interested in the divorce rate. I mean, look, I think divorce statistics are interesting, but I'm more interested in the marriage satisfaction rate. If Andrew, and I'm not picking on you, Andrew, but if Andrew as a married person says to me, yes, I've been married and I've stayed married, I don't consider that a victory. But if Andrew says to me, as I believe he would, I'm married and I like being married. And look, I don't like it all the time. There's nothing anyone likes all the time. But I really think my life is better because I'm married. And I really think that my life would be, again, you're speculating, but you're saying, you know what, I feel like my life is richer for the fact that I made this choice and that I entered into this status with another person. Then you got my interest. Because that's not just about making marriage into an endurance competition that, you win if you manage to stay married, even if you're absolutely miserable. I'm much more interested in what can be done to support people's marriages, to make people happy to be married, not just that they'll hang in there and survive it. I don't think we shouldn't aspire to being on life support. I think we should aspire to having vibrant, healthy lives. So that's where I think our focus should probably be.
I think really what we're going to get into today is really sort of like, what are the stats, what's the reality of it, and then like sort of what do you do about it. So like I know we got into like is and ought and all that good stuff yesterday on Rule Zero, but I think that perhaps like understanding like the nature of what we're dealing with here first, that should be what is informing like what should we do about it, what are the best practices as a result of this. But Andrew, did you have something to say to any of this?
I do. So I won't take as much time. I'm sorry. But if you can give me a little bit of time to respond to some of these points. Let me start with something which was said yesterday, which I want to correct as well. I do agree with you that facts don't care about your feelings, I suppose, but I disagree with you that feelings don't care about facts. That seems silly to me. But kind of moving into this, we were talking about no-fault divorces yesterday, and Rollo had brought up an argument, and I guess it's his own correlatory data, which shows that
got it here. There you go.
Yeah, there you go. Divorce rate and contraceptive use. But that seems to be nothing more to me than a correlation after looking into it myself. So the first argument, which came from the lawyer of the panel, was, don't you think that we should see a higher rate of divorce then when a no-fault divorce is introduced, like in New York? And the answer to that question is yes. I'm showing currently on my screen the stats for this. It is clear that the figure that almost immediately following no-fault implementation, the divorce rate begins to undergo large increases in the specifics, which include no-fault coefficients, takes on higher divorce rates than the specification, which restricts the effects of no-fault laws. It shot up through the roof. That's one. The second thing I can kind of use to demonstrate this is that you are tracking this data going back to when contraception first was introduced, which was actually 10 years prior to no-fault divorce. Mm-hmm. However, we have here an abstract from Mexico, because Mexico introduced no-fault divorce between 2008, 2017. This is 40 years past contraception, and you see a 27% increase in their divorce rates almost immediately. We also have a study which comes in. This is Horowitz, and I can give you the highlights of this study as well. But he looking at 4 different studies which were analyzed by him. For certain, they found the effects of no-fault divorce caused massive increases across the board for divorce rates due to expediency. Another thing that our lawyer friend brings up, he says, wait a second, what about poor people getting divorced? Well, yeah, wouldn't you want to have some kind of financial barrier, perhaps? Now, what could I say to back that up? This Horowitz study says, as the theory predicted, no-fault laws are empirically found to have a high significant positive effects on divorce rates. Further, not only these laws found to be significant in the short run, but also the long run, it goes on to clarify that if you have a financial barrier in the way of the divorce, you end up seeing far less divorces, and then it gives justifications for why that is. So I actually dispute this data by Rollo, and I would like to get into kind of the no fault. He says marriage satisfaction, but I think that that's only one part of it.
So I'd love to respond to that. I think, Andrew, that you're and while I appreciate the reliance on the numbers in terms of the numbers of divorces that are entered, okay? So when you say the divorce rate, you're not talking about the number of people that file divorce actions. You're talking about the entry of judgment of divorces. That's what finalizes a divorce, okay? So of course, I think literally every state, particularly California in '69 when they passed it, when Reagan passed it, who, by the way, was a conservative. I don't know if you guys recall. But he did it for the same reason most states did it, which is to move through a backlog. Okay, there's a tremendous backlog. The divorce process is a protracted process from a paperwork standpoint. Now, again, if you think, and this is not a logic I understand when applied to any number of things. Like, there are not a lot of heroin addicts out there going, you know, I want to use heroin. Oh, shit, wait, it's illegal. I guess I'm not going to do that. The fact that it takes a lot of paperwork to get divorced, more or less paperwork, is not going to be something that's going to cause people to continue to have happy marriages. And
that's
again,
incorrect.
Is
and
the
I can
goal?
Demonstrate.
Hang on. I think
well, listen.
You can demonstrate. You can demonstrate
time.
numbers.
Can we just do one point at a time?
Well, Andrew, I can, but here's the problem. You're still just spitting numbers,
well,
right?
If you make a point,
devoid of
one at a time.
Andrew, I'm sorry. I thought I was speaking. If you
were,
want
and
to,
then I was.
Okay, you want to just keep talking?
I just want to do one point at a time so we can get through it. Otherwise, we end up with a gish gallop.
Because you just scattershotted about 15 that are all
I was responding to 15 of your points.
Wow, man, is it that hard for you to let someone get a sentence in? Or are you just used to shooting fish in a barrel? Is that what you do? Like, because, see, I used to doing this in court. And the way it works in court is there's a court reporter, and one person shuts the fuck up. And then when they're done, the other person starts talking. So that's called a debate. See, look, you're doing it again, my friend. You're doing it again.
At some point, you have to stop talking, though.
Buddy, if you think you're going to stonewall over me, you're just making yourself look
it's
foolish.
Steamroll, not stonewall. That would be the opposite of steamroll.
Well, you've really proved your point, Andrew. You got me on that one, man. Absolutely. Like, this is what you do. Like, I've watched your game, man. It's not impressive to anybody. Oh, there you go again.
Out of Vegas.
Look, I want to have a respectful conversation with you, because until you prove you're not worthy. Okay, keep going, man.
Can we just do 1 point at a time? Why do you evade? Just let's do 1 point at a time. We'll have a constructive debate.
The guy who's interrupted me 15 times is saying I'm trying to evade.
Dude.
Look,
I'm trying to keep you on point. I'm trying to keep you on point. That's it.
Okay, you let me know when you're finished, man.
Okay, let me set a timer. Let's actually physically see how long you talk.
I love debate rules. Let's do it. We'll do point and counterpoint. Ready?
Go ahead.
What time do you want? What time frame do you want to pick?
How about 1 minute? Can you do it in 1 minute? Can you make a point in 1 minute?
Well, I think you can obfuscate the facts in 1 minute, which seems to be what you like to do. What you like to do is just throw some numbers out there like you said something, and then step back and go, well, you see, 42%. There it is right there. As if it means anything.
40 seconds.
Doesn't. Oh, did you start the timer for us already, Andrew? Is this
I'm just hoping you'll make a point at some point so that I can actually respond to the point.
Why don't we? Okay, so I'll tell you what. You pick the topic, because you want us to go one at a time. Mm-hmm. You pick the topic. You set the preposition, and then I'll respond. Okay, we'll do it that. We'll do your rule.
2 minutes.
Whatever rule set you want, my friend. I am ready to roll. Whatever rule set you pick.
All right, let's let Glenn do the time. Go for it.
Okay, so this is easy. I just want to start with the claim that you made for no-fault divorce. You said you can't understand in your mind why this would ever cause anybody to have a more productive divorce or a marriage or more satisfaction in their marriage, things like this. However, what I can demonstrate using this Horowitz study when this was focused on, your exact point, what they state emphatically in this study is very clear. Those barrier to entries make and force the couples who are inside the relationship to begin some kind of reconciliation process while the paperwork is slowed down. So actually, there's a huge benefit to it. There you go. Whole point made with time left on the clock. Can you respond to that?
Happily. Okay. How in the Horowitz study, okay, does one measure marriage satisfaction while waiting for a pending divorce? Because I have to tell you, man, I love when people throw studies out like this and go, well, this study demonstrated that people are much, much happier when they do X, Y, and Z. What in fuck's name are you talking about, man? What was the gauge for happiness? Was it self-report by both parties? One party? Which was it? And you're the one who threw this study out there. So back this thing up. I mean, just saying, like, would you like it if I went, oh, Anthony Fauci said this, so it must be fucking true. Like, let's tie it down. You just talked about a specific thing. You just said that people's barriers to entry, to removal of marriage, okay, increases the likelihood of people reaching a satisfactory resolution that makes them want to continue to stay married. That's your preposition. What is the data that supports that? How did they measure that? You're the one citing the study. I hope you read it.
Yeah, so I'll give you the metrics on this from the Horowitz study. So if you're taking pre-no-fault divorce, we can look at marriage from 1910, 1920, 1930, 1940, 1950, et cetera, so that we can look at the satisfaction rates which people are reporting from staying married. They have to stay married because now there's a barrier to exit. Just like you want a barrier for entry, more supportive barrier for entry. I also want that, but also a barrier for exit because it forces couples to reconcile. It actually forces them to begin a reconciliation process while they're cohabitating. So what the outcomes for the people themselves, to me, are actually far less important than the outcomes for the children. The children's outcomes are what we should be focusing on more than anything else, not just the outcomes of the mommy and daddy and their personal satisfaction rate. Don't you agree?
I have to say, when this is done, I'd like everyone to just rewind the exchange that just happened and watch Andrew just absolutely not answer my direct question and simply instead reiterate the exact same thing he previously said, which is that the marriage satisfaction rate, which I asked him, how is that measured? It's measured by metrics. Oh, okay. That's really helpful. It's measured by metrics. Right. That's how studies work, is things are measured. What metrics? Self-reporting? Is there some outside observer looking at these people are happy? And then, rather than answer the question, you pivoted, love it, and then went, children, which is a great one. Conservatives love that one, but the kids, right? So instead of answering the question, which was specifically asked, because we're doing one at a time, because that's how you wanted to do it. Then you said, you didn't answer it, and then you said, but it also affects children, and totally pivot to another topic, which is children. Yes, okay, we can talk about children later on, but you're the one who wants to go one at a time. Again, I'll ask you, what is the metric by which they are measuring a happy satisfaction rate that leads to any kind of, because again, all you're simply saying is when you make it harder to get divorced, people get divorced less frequently. Right. That seems pretty sensible. When you put locks on doors, people don't go through those doors as easily. But does that mean that they should stay in the burning house? Is that a good thing?
So the metrics, I just told you what the metrics were. They were able to go back and look at previous data based on the self-reporting of those people, and they were able to determine these happiness metrics in the Horowitz study. I literally told it to you, and I showed it on screen. Not only that, just to kind of move on from there, just so that you understand, this is extremely important that we have comparative data for this. When we're looking at this data, we're looking for these strong correlatories. We know that the outcomes for children are far better when the parents remain intact in a two-parent household and married. Even if their marriage, they don't report high satisfaction rates inside their own marriage, the outcomes for the children still better. This is what's called a compound argument. It's not a singular factor because we're looking at a lot of different data points here. So I do have a study. I have given you what the study is. I've told you who it's by. I've told you the metrics that they used, and I've told you what their findings on no-fault divorce are. And I would like for you to tell me why it is that you think that no-fault divorce, and this is your claim, that's not the problem. That's not the issue. There's some other issue other than that when it does not seem like the metrics back that up, man.
Let me jump in here. Hold that thought, James. Real quick. Sure. First off, I have a real problem with the term happiness. Okay, not because I'm some sort of unhappy guy, right? I think that the idea of happiness is sort of the carrot that we use to get the donkey to pull the cart. Okay, the idea of a sustainable, maintainable type of happiness really relies on this idea that you can in some way have some sort of maintainable long-term contentment in your life. And I think that the ability to measure that, satisfaction, happiness, a lot of that is really kind of loose, rough science these days, because if you look at any of the studies, like say by like Rob Henderson, or you look at stuff, even Dr. David Buss for that matter, happiness is a proximate goal. It is not an ultimate goal. It is something that you're feeling while you're in the moment doing something. So you could ask people to self-report what their state of happiness is at any particular time. And if their dog just died, they're probably going to say that they're pretty unhappy with their lives at that point. So I think that using happiness as sort of this metric by which we're going to say marriage is this or marriage is that, I think we got to remember, I'm not saying it's not something we ought to consider, but I'm also saying we should also consider the fact that the way we consider or we think of happiness right now in a long-term state, in a maintainable state, is not really something I think that is something that is a metric for whether or not marriage ought to be this or no-fault divorce does that. The other question I had for you, Andrew, as well, is that when you're quoting these Mexican studies from, I presume from Mexico, these aren't Mexicans that are actually in the United States. Am I clear on that? This is actually from the country Mexico.
Yes, these are the metrics. So the metrics. So we have not only that, but we have the Canadian study, which also shows that when no-fault divorce is introduced in Canada, it's the same exact thing. You see this kind of radical.
Let me ask you just some particulars here. What year was no-fault divorce instituted in Mexico?
It looks like, according to the study, it was 2008 to 2016.
Okay, so this is long after hormonal birth control was a thing in Mexico.
Right.
Mexico.
Well, you're missing the point of what used to be called a Mexican divorce. So, Andrew's that's not correct.
Hold that thought, James. Put that in. Write that down on your notes there for a second.
Because there's two kinds of no-fault divorce. There's unilateral no-fault divorce, and then there's the statutory no-fault, which means you don't have to allege grounds. Unilateral no-fault was what Mexico had for ages. Thank you, Andrew.
Let me jump.
My law degree is worth something.
Hold that thought. Glenn, you get your timer ready. The other thing I wanted to point out is when I was showing you guys this, where's that statistic there? I'll call this up again.
Do you know, Rollo, with statistics?
Go ahead.
By the statistics, every human being on Earth has one testicle. Fun fact.
true story.
Yeah.
Divorce rate and oral contraceptive use. Now, again, this is CDC and Census Bureau data like overlaid on top of each other here. This is correlative. I'm not saying it's causation. Okay, I know the difference. Correlation is not causation. Got it. But that's one hell of a correlation.
So
Okay.
the reason that I looked into this at all, and you are right here, is because I did find it to be a compelling argument. The first time I've actually really heard a compelling argument and pushback towards my worldview on this, because it is a really strong correlative. And I don't believe that it has nothing to do with it. I'm just saying I don't think that it's the strongest correlative that we have. If we look at the data from the other nations, which came far after contraception was introduced, and we still see these kind of rampant rises in the rates of divorce, I find that to be a much more compelling correlative. That's my only point.
Okay, well, now
I do think it's good data, and I never even had considered it until you brought it up.
Well, my other.
I still think you're shooting the wrong target with all due respect. The idea of remaining married, okay, I don't think is anybody's goal. Look, there are better arguments, Andrew, for the preposition you're making. Like the better argument is that there was studies, I think it was 2021, I can look it up if you want, that there was a long-term study that essentially found that unhappily married adults were no happier than divorced adults, meaning that in terms of satisfaction in life, that 12 separate measures of psychological well-being, and it was like depression, self-esteem, they did all of these specific metrics, and they said that people who were divorced and people who were unhappily married were actually both the same, that there was no change.
What about their kids, though?
Okay, well,
actually, wait a second. There's a great book, longest term study ever done on that, called The Unexpected Legacy of Divorce. And what it talks about is that parental conflict is bad for children, not divorce. There is a high correlation between parental conflict and divorce, no kidding. But the reality is that unhappily married people with a lot of conflict in the marriage have the same levels of toxicity in terms of the effect that it has on their children as divorced people.
That's not true.
Okay. Again, longest term study ever done, Unexpected Legacy of Divorce. It's a whole book, Andrew. It's not something you can just pull up on a PDF. The Unexpected Legacy of Divorce.
The book has
Look it up and read it.
For its studies, I'm guessing, right?
Right. Yes. So go ahead and read the whole book. I'm not going to read it to you.
James, hold up a sec. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah. So if I was going to say this, because I don't think either one of you are making arguing out of bad faith or anything. What I think is you could both cite studies that are in reality, but I think there's two things here that have a weight. And for Andrew, I think the weight of the children and them growing up in a two-person household, I'm just going to say that has a certain weight to it, and that outweighs whatever being happy in the relationship is, or in his estimation, there's a way to become happy through counseling, et cetera, or, just shut the fuck up and deal with it and just be unhappy as long as the family stays together. Then I think, because I've heard you talk about this before, James, is that there's a certain weight to actually being happy in a relationship, and in correlation to the children and their well-being, your argument is maybe being happy in a relationship weighs more, or being unhappy in the relationship also can be toxic to the children. What I'm saying is both. It's just how much do you put a weight on each one of these things? And it feels like Andrew puts more of the weight on the children, and James puts more of the weight on the happiness in the relationship. Is that close? Because I don't think either one of you are being illogical here. It's just a function of preference here on those 2 points.
But Mr. Sartain, I think that is the crux of the argument. So
no, that's what I'm
argument.
Saying.
Well, I think that the what you guys refer to as the tradcons make such poor arguments on this is because they don't grant that what you're saying is true. And I do grant that what you're saying is true, because when I look at it, it does seem that the metrics that you cite are true metrics and are highly problematic. But what I'm looking at is this gap, which is occurring globally between 18 to 30-year-olds. We have a demonstrably low birth rate, and it's on the decline like you can't even imagine, to the point where we're going to be under the replacement threshold. Even
we already are.
I'm not even talking about the replacement threshold for two people. I'm talking about the replacement threshold for one person. That's where we're heading soon. If you don't have the 18 to 30s, they subsidize the generation before, and they subsidize the 5 generations after, or 4 generations after, depending on what area you're living in. But we could easily end up with a 7-generation West soon, 7 living generations. If we don't have this, you're going to end up like Japan. You're going to end up like China. You're going to end up like South Korea, where they can't take care of their elderly and they can't take care of their youth either, because the 18 to 30-year-olds subsidize the entire planet. This is a catastrophe. I'm almost done. 1 second.
Okay,
I swear, almost done. This is a catastrophe of magnitudes of which you can't even fathom if you see population collapse like this. So I think the most important metric to look at is not your own material happiness. I think that you should be looking at the best material state and the best spiritual state for children to be successful in the world. That's the crux of my argument.
All right, let me throw this out here real quickly just before we start, because I don't think a lot of conservatives really understand the fertility slump here. And maybe this speaks a little bit more to your point about no fault divorce, and maybe backs up my claim about hormonal birth control. And I'm not saying that maybe it's a combination of the two, okay? Because I'm not saying it has to be one or the other. Sure. But this is the fertility slump that you're referring to right here. And look where it starts, right around 1965, when hormonal birth control was introduced in the United States.
It actually starts in the year 1800.
Well, okay.
And it goes like this.
Yeah. So we see this decline, we see this with this boost, and now from the last, let's just say 60 some odd years, now we've been below replacement level since 1972, 1973. Yep. The time to be having this conversation, being worried about, I know that's kind of neither here nor there at this point, but the fertility rate has been below replacement level for quite some time right now. And again, at the time when, if you look at that precipitous drop right there, that's right after hormonal birth control and, of course, no fault divorce, which, if I'm going to make a play here, I'm going to say that no fault divorce is a fallout. It is a downstream effect of hormonal birth control. So go ahead, Mike. What were you going to say?
Oh, yeah. So just to add a little bit of context, because what Andrew said is true. The thing is, prior to the year 1850, over half the Earth's population died before the age of 5. So having a high birth rate was a function of survival. Birth rate does not equal survival rate. And the second part was up until 1929, or the Dust Bowl, actually, or let's just say go up to the 1950s, you needed large families in order to survive. So not all those people were surviving. So those numbers don't quite, especially once you have the advent of broad spectrum antibiotics in 1937, you need fewer children to maintain your children, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Whereas the gentleman from Ontario now has the floor.
Yeah, it's the problem with stats, and the whole thing here. We can do the stats back and forth. It's like I was saying earlier. Statistically, every human being on Earth has one testicle, right? So assuming they're done correctly,
I did the math. That is correct.
Yeah, assuming they're done correctly, which they usually aren't. Assuming they're looking at the right variables, which they probably aren't, and assuming they give you something you can do about it, which they absolutely cannot. It's just an aggregate number, right? There's a meaning behind it, and you guys can argue whatever. The only thing I know is right now, today, I can not trust any egghead, any authority that says anything, because they're always wrong. All you can trust is what you can see with your eyes. So yeah, children being happy, children being raised well, that could probably work. What do you have to do about it? You have to, enforce boundaries, make your group as happy as possible, because happy parents don't fuck up their kids. Mm-hmm. So it's like first principles. You got to stick back to what you can see here. And there's too many variables to even account for all this stuff. So as far as the immigration birth rate argument, that argument was settled in the 1980s. Right now, our plan is unrestricted immigration to hopefully beat out China, India, and Africa on an attrition scale. So,
yeah, but to your point there on with
sorry. This is one I actually wanted to ask you at the end, Andrew. Mm-hmm. We remove no fault divorce tomorrow, if we add it, at fault divorce. Sorry. Yeah. Do you think those people are going to be any better off when they're forced by the state to stay together? Knowing that after 2020, most people realize state enforcing their will on you is not necessarily a good thing. I can't.
I'm gonna be way better off.
So that was.
I lost a tremendous amount of lucrative aspect to my practice when New York went no fault.
And that's my point.
Because we used to do fault trials, and fault trials burned the first $10,000 to $20,000 of the couple's money. So what we would do is we'd put one on the stand and we would say, what happened in the marriage? Oh, he was so mean to me and he made me so upset. Here's the thing. Look, I think we can go statistics all day long. And I think Andrew and I will both find things that support our respective positions. That's what's great when you're a trial lawyer is cigarette companies found, doctors who would testify to the fact that cigarettes were good for you. You pay enough, you can find statistics that back things up. It's a really easy thing to do. I think what we fundamentally should be looking at here is why are marriages failing at an alarming rate? And to say it's because people can get divorced slightly easier and slightly cheaper, I think that's just ridiculous. And
I would
don't think
argue
you have to have a
people
PhD.
don't know how to socialize together long term.
Well, the
That's
argument
honestly mine.
I think should be, and I thought I heard Andrew say it yesterday, and it was the most compelling thing he said from my perspective, was that we need to figure out how to build communities that support marriage. You know, how can men support men in staying married, staying fidelitous, staying focused? Now, Andrew, from what I understood, was saying that that is in some ways tied to religion, and that religious communities help people understand their gender roles, the responsibilities of them, help them figure out what it is that is expected of them as a husband or as a wife, help them have definition, help them have support, multi-generational support.
So why did they stop doing that 50 years ago?
I think there's a lot of other reasons why people rebelled against religion. But the question is this too far south north? Do we treat dandruff with decapitation? That's the conversation we should be having. I really just don't think this is my problem with Matt Walsh. My problem with Matt Walsh was not that Matt Walsh has 6 kids and says being married is phenomenal for him. That's great. And even if he says, hey, young people, young men, be married. Don't run around chasing skirt and having a, instead focus on building yourself and building a family. Listen, these are worthwhile sentiments. And I can't say he's wrong or right. I don't know. But what I can say without question is no fault divorce is not the reason why people are getting divorced more than they used to. Even if you show a slight uptick after you pass no fault statutes, in large part because they streamlined the process so all the backlog of divorces finally got put through. It's not about that. This is about why do people hate being married so much these days? Why do people not want to get married these days? This is the question that matters, not no fault divorce. Believe me, get rid of no fault divorce. We'll go back to divorce lawyers. Will go back to making more money. We'll be happy to do it, but it is not going to solve the problem you're trying to solve.
I got really quickly here. Declining birth rates is consistent across all countries right now.
Yeah,
even the ones
I think is the only exception.
Even the ones that don't have no fault divorce. So as far as the fertility slump across the board, globally speaking, right now, you can't really make that connection in a worldwide sense because you're still looking at at countries that don't even consider no fault divorce.
Well, and Rollo, what it caused by female prosperity. That's the singular reason that drops the birth rate.
More or less, yeah.
So the only argument if you want to raise the birth rate is basically have to make women barefoot and in the kitchen by law, which nobody's going to go for that.
Well, industrialization is a big prime cause of birth rate drops across the board and has been for a long time. As people become more educated, they most certainly do much more in the way of family planning, this type of thing. However, you will find that the birth rates themselves, are far better with people who are more religious. So the more religious a person reports being, the more children they're likely to have, meaning that people who don't agree with the religious seem to be thinking themselves right out of existence. And kind of back to our lawyer friends, kind of argument here, I think that this is ground zero, as it were. So I do think that foundationally we should have that conversation about no fault divorce, but we should also have a foundational talk past that into community building, like you're talking about, how the religious would come into that. I want to have the conversation for all those things, but I do need you to note this one important thing. If you had a modern battle, like two squads fighting with each other, and it was 20% of them died, that would be considered a fucking bloodbath, a bloodbath of spectacular proportions. You're talking about an increase in some of these places of 30%, 35%, and you're like, it's a slight uptick. That seems kind of disingenuous, dude. Just to be honest with you, it seems kind of disingenuous.
Yeah, I don't know where you're getting those numbers from, but again, it seems to be your favorite way of addressing things is to sort of throw out numbers with absolutely no actual specific reference. But I hear you. I guess what I would say that again, okay, that's nice. I have a pony in front of me. It's just out of camera. I'd love to see it.
I can't.
And again, but here's the thing. I think fundamentally, for example, what you just said about how educated people are less likely to reproduce. Is that essentially one of the statistics you were just citing?
That's correct.
Well, educated people are less likely to divorce. So what do we do with that? How do we tie those two statistics together? Should we use that to suggest the possibility that Like what you're doing is you're just taking statistical concepts and numbers and trying to put them together in ways that just respectfully, they don't fit and they don't match the preposition you're trying to create. You're trying to suggest that the instance of people having an entered judgment of divorce means that there are unhappier families as a function of no-fault divorce. This just means that people have finalized a divorce. Do you know how many people are living separate and apart under a written stipulation of settlement as if they were divorced? We used to jokingly call it an Irish divorce. You go out for milk and you never come home. That is what people would do when we were fault-based, because there were so many barriers. It wasn't that they went,
but they did it way less.
Shit,
they did it way less.
Andrew, respectfully, I didn't interrupt you once when you've been speaking.
I have to, or I can't get a word in, dude. Just to be fair. Like, I'm trying to be fair with you.
Andrew, being fair would be to be quiet while the grown-ups are talking, and then I'm quiet when you're talking. And I didn't say, I didn't say a word while you were talking, man. And Glenn's got.
That's because I talk in these little segments and you talk in these big segments.
Well, that's because you're talking in little segments that don't make any sense. You throw grenades of stupidity out and then go, when I start speaking, you just jump in and interrupt every time I'm trying to make a point. So for someone who seems to value debate so much, you don't seem to follow the rules of it very closely.
Hey, hold on real quick. Glenn, you had something to say. Go ahead. Finally.
Yeah, so my question to Andrew is like, look, I get what you're saying, but the answer right now is not the church or the way the church does marriage, because Christians have a 25% divorce rate as well. So they're not doing significantly better than anybody else. They may be having more kids, but they're still just as bad in divorce or maintaining a marriage as everybody else is. So that can't be that's not the solution for this right now. So what is
let me address that, because it's actually not true. So inside of the United States, when people are asked what type of religion they follow, right, as a form of average, they almost always will respond that they're Christians as a self-identifier. But if you dig into the data a little bit more, especially from Pew Research has been great about this. They identify people by how often they go to church, how much they participate in the religious activities versus people who just self-ID and don't. And you will find that the people who actually participate in the religion and don't just self-ID as being that religion, the metrics are far better. Less rates of divorce, less rates of addiction problems for children. The children do better. The parents do better. They actually make more money. Almost every single metric they do better in. So it's kind of
what actions do they take that are so different than the heathens?
Well, that's what I'm saying. What I'm getting
so what they look at,
they're not real Christians.
Yeah, I'm just saying it's a self-ID. It's no different than when a man says he's a woman. It's just a self-ID. There's no truth to it.
Yeah, look, I think Andrew, when we disagree loudly, but when we agree, I think we agree, and he's absolutely correct. I mean, people who identify as Christian, they're essentially saying, yeah, I'm Christian, like I'm Caucasian, like I'm German by ethnicity, but am I German from Germany? Do I have any German, do I do any rituals or anything in my family that has anything to do with that? So yeah, there are plenty of people that identify as Christian, but what the statistics reflect and what reality, again, common sense, let's get away just from statistics, because it's easy to lie with statistics. It's not hard to you don't need to be a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. Practicing Christians who belong to a church, belong to a faith community where there's a group of people who are dealing with similar struggles in life. They have the support of other people in that community. The children are raised together with similar values. Yeah, of course, those people are going to have a stronger bond with each other, with their community. When they have problems, they're going to be more likely to have a support system to talk to. Like, this is not rocket science, but it doesn't get back to the fundamental problem, which again, most people aren't in that situation.